So there's this law called the Reinheitsgewhat. This is the Bavarian Beer Purity Act of the year 1516, where essentially the Bavarian government said you can only legally make beer with water, yeast, hops, and barley. Well, at Dogfish Head, when I wrote that business plan for our company 26 years ago, we said we will stand up against the Reinheitsgewhat and be the first brewery in America committed to brewing the majority of our beers outside of those rules. And you can still make an awesome beer with just water, yeast, hops, and barley. And let's face it, over 90% of the beer sold commercially around the world is sold within those parameters. But if you want to brew an extreme beer, that's when you gotta look for further creative inspiration. Maybe it's amplifying those ingredients that I listed, or oftentimes it's about thinking about creative ingredients through the lens of a chef, where a chef can think about any ingredient from anywhere in the world to add to their dish. And that's the concept of creative brewing Dogfish Head has always prescribed to, and that's why we were so proud when our friends at Beer Advocate decided to launch the Extreme Beer Fest well over a decade ago, and Dogfish has been proud to be the sponsor brewery of the EBF for well over a decade as well. So we know we're going through unprecedented, challenging, tumultuous times here in the era of COVID. And as I believe the philosopher Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, we did not plan to do a virtual EBF in 2021, but necessity is the mother of invention, and much like inventing a great EBF beer recipe, we've invented a new ideation of the EBF for 2021, Dogfish, Beer Advocate, halftime beverage, and an amazing list of participating breweries. I've been a longtime friend and fan of the Beer Advocate community, and you know, Todd and I and the gang at Beer Advocate have not just been proudly collaborating on the Extreme Beer Fest itself in isolation, which is really essentially one weekend a year. We've been lucky to do it in other cities as well, but really thinking about Extreme Beer Fest as like a movement instead of a moment in time, including incorporating the book that we got to do together called Project Extreme Brewing, and even the series of videos that we did called Project Extreme Brewing as well, where we got to do collaborative brews with breweries that we love, a bunch of which are participating in this year's EBF. When I got my box, I was stoked to see beers from friends of mine like Shorts Brewing in Michigan and Lost Abbey, Tommy, my buddy out there in Cali, who participated in the Project Extreme Brewing book and series as well. Knowing that this was going to be a momentous year, memorable year of the EBF, we wanted to do something really memorable in that we envisioned ourselves in your place, knowing that the UPS or FedEx driver was going to arrive with your box of goodness, and said, well, what would be something people would be really psyched to get with cabin fever that they might not be able to get right now in your local beer store. So we decided to look backwards and forwards for inspiration for this year's picks that we curated, the two beers for Dogfish Head EBF 2021. Looking backwards, we decided to do one of our most beloved high ABV beers, Olde School Barleywine, and we curated the ones that are absolutely tasting the best from my personal stash. And it turns out those are the years from 2012 through 2017, and different attendees are getting different vintages of our bottled Olde School Barleywine. And for the other beer that we chose, we decided to go to the other spectrum on how hard it is to find, because it's literally in trucks right now heading towards your local beer store. And now I'm going to go to the place where we make it to tell you a little bit more about it. Oh, do we have some news for you today, and it is oh so juicy. Introducing Dogfish Head's Hazy-O IPA. It is incredibly juicy, hop forward. It is designed around 8 different varieties, very citrusy, pineapple, mango, tropical juicy hops, and most importantly, no other IPA can say this, it's brewed with 4 different oat formats. These 4 concentric layers of oats deliver that hoppy bullseye in a way that no other IPA does. What are those oat formats? So you got rolled oats, you got malted oats, naked oats, and the piece de resistance, oat milk. So oat milk is absolutely on fire in the Better For You community right now. It's up almost 1,000% in sales today. And for Hazy-O, what it delivers is this amazing silky mouthfeel that makes this beer drink like a 5 ABV session IPA instead of the 7.1 bad boy that it is. So now I'm here in Brewhouse 2 where we make our best-selling beers like 60 Minute, like 90, like Sea Quench, like Slightly Mighty, and now like Hazy-O. And not only is it our biggest brew house in our whole Dogfish universe, it's also a living kind of archive to our history of packaging design. And as you can see, we are just as thoughtful and sort of art-centric in our approach to designing our packaging as we are in our approach as brewers to designing artful recipes. So in the case of Hazy-O, we really wanted to visually, quickly bring to life what is so unique about this beer. So essentially there are tons of awesome hazy IPAs out there on the market. What really differentiates ours is the 4 formats of oats that we use to make it so special. And we brought that to life by showing the 4 concentric circles of O's that creates a bullseye for the juicy hops to do their beautiful work. And Hazy-O is the first nationally distributed oat milk infused hazy. And when you look at trends in America, the hazy IPA style is the fastest growing beer style in America. It grew about 100% last year in 2020. Fastest growing alcohol segment is seltzers. That grew about 200%. But oat milk in stores across America grew over 215%. So we feel that Hazy-O really sits in that sweet spot between the Hazy-O trend that people are so excited about it and the Better For You trend that people have led them towards gravitating towards oat milk. So it's been fun telling you about Hazy-O in this wood-lined room. Now I'm excited to tell you about Olde School Barleywine that's produced in wood-lined tanks. So now that you've gotten to hear a little bit about literally the newest innovation from Dogfish going coast to coast, Hazy-O IPA, we're gonna go back in time a bit to talk about the other beer that's in your kit, Olde School Barleywine. And I'm here in the room where we aged this beautiful beer. The inspiration for Olde School actually came from a recording that Woody Guthrie did with Alan Lomax for the Library of Congress. In it, he asked Woody Guthrie about being not just an American protest song pioneer, but being an OG homebrewer. And basically Woody Guthrie said he was making beer with his buddies, and it said on the kit of beer making stuff, if you add 1 pack of yeast and wait 2 weeks, the beer will be great. And he and his buddy said, well, maybe if we add 14 packs of yeast and just wait 1 day, we can really accelerate this process. The beer ended up tasting like crap, but I was like, holy shit, that's a cool story. And basically I asked my good buddy, Johnny Langford, a member of the band The Mekons, the UK-based punk band, who's an amazing artist in his own right, to do this label that's an homage to Woody Guthrie, adding the packet of yeast, because our goal with Olde School was to brew a beer that was massive in character, in ABV, but was naturally bottle conditioned on the yeast, the packet like Woody is putting in there. Also to accentuate the complexity of this beer, in addition to the normal Reinheitsgewhat ingredients, water, yeast, hops, and barley, we add in pureed dates and figs, because we knew when you age a beer, it's gonna, basically the hop notes are gonna recede out of it, and what's gonna come forward from the aging, especially if you're aging it in wood, it's gonna bring these sort of sherry notes of oxidation forward and accentuate the pit fruit notes that we further accelerated by adding dates and figs to this recipe. So you've got one that's literally in the sweet spot, again, up to what, almost 10 years old in your package, that we know you're gonna love. So cheers, I hope you love your Olde School.
Hello, it's morning and I'm drinking again out in front of our beautiful brewery here in Milton, Delaware. Today we're talking about our Olde School barley wine. As far as I know, this is the world's strongest barley wine. It comes in at about 15% alcohol. It would be about 13% alcohol, except we dose in pureed dates and figs as we make this beer. I found an old manual from a cellarman in England, and he talked about how he would go into pubs, and if the casks were flat, he would tie dates and figs that he would kind of chop up to strings and drop them into the casks, and the yeast that would come back alive and find those fruit sugars and get that beer in the cask recarbonated. So I kind of applied what I learned from him to making this barley wine. We now brew tens of thousands of cases of this beer every year. It's a wonderful aging beer. This particular batch that I'm holding in my hands now is 5 years old. As you can see, it's unfiltered. As it ages, it kind of dries out, gains complexity. The pit fruit notes really come forward in the aroma nose of the beer. The hops, even though it's substantially hops, kind of recede behind that fruit. It's just a wonderful, complex beer. We hope that you find it and enjoy it. Incidentally, this is also our film submission to the Olympic Committee. Our hope is that by 2022, bocce will get its rightful place as an acknowledged Olympic sport, and that you will consider hosting the Summer Olympics in 2022, because I plan to enter on the U.S. Italian-American track team.
So you just got to see me talking about how we make our vintage to aged Old School, but vintage date bottle collecting and aging beers in your home is something anybody can do. So a few pro tips on that are basically the way you want to store your beers. Let's start there. The best thing for your beer is to store it cool. It doesn't have to be fridge temp, but at least cellar temp, and actually dark is really important too, to keep the light off of that beer. It's true to some degree that hops acts as a preservative for beer, but actually the best preservatives for beer, when you're choosing which beers to buy on the shelf, that could be great candidates to go into your beer cellar for aging. The things that are really the friends of aging beer well are beers that are high in ABV. That's probably the best preservative, and usually the threshold for real durability in aging is beers over 10% ABV, I'd say, are the best candidates. And secondarily would not be hops behind ABV, it actually would be dark grains. Really help a beer age. And you can see from Old School that we're using some caramel, some crystal grains in addition to pale to give it that color to also help it age. So at Dogfish Head, the opportunity to reinvent and reinterpret what beer can be has always been our raison d'etre. When we opened, we were literally the smallest commercial brewery in America, brewing 12-gallon batches right down the road from here in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And the majority of those tiny little fermenters were filled with beers that had raisins and coffee and licorice root and apricot in them. And as we've grown, I've been proud of our growth, but I'm more proud of the fact that we've never had to waver from that original inspiration when we were the smallest brewery in the country. Right now, I'm looking out the window here in Milton at 1,200 barrel fermentation tanks. And I started with 12-gallon fermentation tanks. And the fact that those giant tanks out there are filled with beers that have sea salt, black limes, oat milk, raisins, pumpkin meat in them tells me that we've been very lucky to be part of a community that has embraced a broader definition of brewing and what beer can be. And to me, the Extreme Beer Fest is at the heart of that community.